Trigger warning. This video contains references to themes of suicide which some individuals may find distressing.
Sometimes we want to talk to people that look like us, have the same shared or lived experiences, because when you walk into that room, there's like a sense of, I don't have to explain everything about myself. I don't have to tell you that my parents migrated here and X, Y, Z, all these things have happened, because you already know, you've already been through that yourself. How many times have you said, hey, how are you to someone? And they're like, I'm fine. Or you've said, I'm fine back. When really you've probably got a lot going on, and it would just be so helpful for yourself to just, talk about it. And then it gives the other person the opportunity to talk about what's going on in their life as well.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to overlook anything to do with mental health because we can't see it, right? We just feel it, we experience it.
Kia ora na katoa, and welcome to Let's Get Pre-Sifik, a podcast focused on providing concepts and tools for the kete, or basket of knowledge, in dealing with suicide prevention through a Pacific lens. My name is Wiriamu, or Will, and I'll be guiding us through open, honest, and sometimes confronting talanoa about improving our mental health. Dr. Sarah Kapeli is an Aotearoa-born Tongan who hails from Lapaha in Tongatapu. She is a lecturer and researcher at the University of Auckland School of Psychology, and her work largely contributes to the area of Pacific health and well-being, with a particular focus on mental health. Sarah is deeply passionate about working alongside our Pacific communities to develop research that is meaningful, accessible, and action-focused.
Kia ora na. Thank you for having me, Will. E malo alele, everyone. My name is Sarah Kapeli, and my father is from Lapaha in Tongatapu, and my mum is from here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I've grown up, I guess, in two worlds, with my Tongan world and my Palangi world as well. And I guess sometimes growing up, trying to navigate two worlds, it can be a bit conflicting sometimes. But what I guess I have enjoyed most about the journey that I've had through life is just being able to take all my experiences from both worldviews and just applying them, especially to the work that I'm doing now in research, in Pacific research, and just trying to empower our communities with the knowledge that I wish I'd had when I was growing up. And just, coming into that space now has just been, really important for me. I know it's been super beneficial for some of my students as well, and also just being able to share that type of knowledge and I guess the resources that I come into contact with just with our family as well. You see the younger generations coming through.
And you talked about kind of mixed cultures. Do you think that's part of the reason you went down the psychology aspect, just to try and understand?
Yeah. So psychology was never a long aspiration or a long-term aspiration of mine. My mother got really sick in my mid-20s. And so I actually left my job to care for her. And so when she started, by God's good grace, she started to get better. So I was like, okay, what am I going to do with my life now? So it was either return to the workforce or it was to return to study. So then I decided to return to study, and I just became really interested in psychology, how we understand what's going on in our minds, how it affects our behaviours. Just after seeing some, just with my mum being so sick and how it really affected her mental health as well. So that kind of triggered me to explore that pathway. So I went back to university and decided to study psychology, and then did a postgraduate year. And I think at the time I had dreams of becoming a clinical psychologist, just wanting to help people. I just, with my background, I always want to help people, just that passion or that desire just to serve. I took one of the papers for clinical psychology, and I found it wasn't really for me. I guess it gave off more of an individualistic vibe. You're helping one person at a time. And I was like, we have to do more. We have to be able to affect greater change with more people. And absolutely, that space is so, so needed. We do need more clinical psychologists. We particularly need more Pacific clinical psychologists. But I just didn't, I was like, no, that's not the path for me. And then I got exposed to research, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And I found I wasn't too bad at it. And I found out how, we can use research to inform clinical practice. We can use research to inform prevention intervention strategies, policy, at a governmental level. And, everything, I guess, lots of things that we do in life that's all informed by evidence. When we go to buy, we go to buy a new fridge, we're doing all this research because we want to buy the best one that suits our needs, suits our family's needs, right? So and I'm a bit of a researcher by nature, so it just kind of fit, and it's like the penny dropped when I got exposed to research. So so that's how I kind of ended up there.
Or have you researched things like when we talk about mental health? And because when most people talk, we don't come from an academic perspective. We just say you got good mental health or bad mental health. From a research perspective and a Pacific research perspective, what's mental health?
There's no easy answer to that, because mental health, it doesn't even translate to our, all of our Pacific languages. And so when we talk about that, there's a lot of stigma around talking about mental health more generally. And I think everyone can resonate with that. I've had conversations with my dad. I'm like, Dad, do you know what depression is? Do you know what anxiety is? And he's like, no idea. And then when we talk about the feelings that are associated or the experiences of being like depressed or being anxious, my dad will be like, oh yeah, I felt like that before. And I'm like, oh, so what did you do? He's like, I just got up and went to work. And so, I guess in the Tongan language, we would describe, this is one way of describing depression is, what is it? Mawhasia oi atamai, which means like you are overburdened, like your mind is overburdened. But that doesn't mean that everyone in our Tongan community would describe depression the same way. So, depression is such a Western term, it's a Western concept, so being able to translate it into all these different Pacific languages can be quite difficult as well. So, understanding what mental health is or what it looks like can be different across our Pacific communities as well. And
I wonder, do you think we need to zoom in? When I look at kind of parts of your work, I see words like meaningful, accessible, action focused. I guess mental health might be a word, a Western word we give it, but to find the answers, do we need to go in a bit further?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I guess one of the concepts that we understand really well across the Pacific is va, in Tongan it's tauhi va, so that ability, like that connectedness with one another, our relationships. And it's also, one of the, it's a protective factor for having, I guess, good mental health and preventing or minimizing suicide, but also it can be a risk factor. If our relationships break down, no matter what the relationship is, if it's with a parent, if it's with a sibling, if it's with, a significant other, if that relationship breaks down, it affects your whole world. And that can lead off into a spiral of different events. But when our relationships are really, really good, then we are doing really good ourselves. And I think that, just the element of relationships, connectedness, a lot of our good health and wellbeing outcomes can derive from that. If we're going to therapy or going to counselling, sometimes incorporating like family into those sessions can be so helpful, or just having them part of the care plan.
Māori and Pacific communities, we hardly talk about prevention. It's all at the other end of the spectrum. Yep. And I guess, made me think about the statistics, and I guess from a researcher's point of view, have you looked much into the suicide statistics, especially around Māori Pacific?
We're experiencing higher rates of, distress and higher rates of suicide. Particularly we see for our Pacific women, we are experiencing higher rates of internalized mental health challenges. So that's anxiety and depression. Whereas our Pacific men, they're experiencing higher rates of externalized mental health challenges. So that's substance abuse. And, we see the implications of that with suicide, because it's our young Pacific men who are dying by suicide at higher rates as well. And so I guess, looking at how do we prevent these things from happening? How do we minimize the impacts? A thing that I've seen through research, and I'm not a practitioner, I'm not a therapist by any means, but the things that we see coming through research is the ability to talk. People, sometimes it's that whakama or that shame about talking about mental health, or, they don't actually know how to talk about it, like you said, or they don't know where to go, or who could offer them that appropriate support. Or who could guide them as well. So I think it's just having the conversation. We need to keep the talanoa going about mental health. We need to be able to normalize it. I think that's one of the key things, is that we need to normalize talking about it. We need to normalize talking about suicide. Someone in our family died by suicide, and while it wasn't unsurprising that nobody wanted to talk about it, or, even what it was frustrating, because we're not talking. We're just not talking about it. And it's showing our kids, our younger generation, that, it's okay, we shouldn't talk about things like that, that stigma. And it's I can see with my dad's generation, things like that you wouldn't talk about. But now we're in my generation and the generations that are coming through, like we really need to start unpacking, why aren't we talking about suicide? What exactly is it? What leads someone to suicide? Because it's those conversations with our family and our communities that are going to, break down that stigma, and hopefully, one life lost to suicide is one life too many. So that's what we've got to try and do.
How can we encourage someone who might not even know that that's a thing that they should be doing?
Yeah,
because actually it feels probably sometimes right if you're scared, worry, anxious to bottle it up.
I think it's easy to fall into that trap, and especially what we've seen in the research is that, it's this modelling of behaviour from our elders, especially those who may have migrated here to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and we've seen them push through everything. They're super resilient. They've migrated from our beautiful islands to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and when they've faced hardship or worry or fear or anxiety, they've just pushed through, and maybe they haven't talked about it to us either. So although they've shown this great resilience, they're also not showing us how to work through those types of things, or and so I think that can be really difficult for, as children of the migration or people who are born here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, how do we navigate going through tough things if no one's ever shown us how to do it? We sure don't learn it at school. So I think that's one of the huge barriers in terms of, even accessing. We see our Pacific communities access help services or support services at lower rates as well. And sometimes that can be seen as, okay, we don't need them, but we really do need them. We just don't know how to access them, what we would say when we'd get there. Or we don't even know they exist or where to go. And I think just now with social media and with all the online platforms we have, it's a lot more accessible. But again, it's only going to be accessible to people who have that, I guess, digital literacy, or who have access to the internet, or, what kind of search terms to type in on your search bar. So again, there's limitations in that aspect. But yeah, there's things like, obviously podcasts like this, you can listen to people that you never would have maybe met in real life. You can listen to their advice and you can take their guidance, might be able to share some pearls of wisdom or maybe some resources that would be beneficial. Yeah. One that springs to mind, especially around suicide prevention, is Life Keepers. So it's this nationwide suicide prevention training. And it's so awesome. You can do it all online, in the comfort of your own home. Take as much time as you need to get through it as well. And it just talks about language, how we talk about suicide, how we could talk to someone that we think is at risk of suicide, how we can just talk about mental health, and it has videos, just so you can see what a conversation could play out and how you could make that conversation, I guess, your own when you're talking with someone, which I think is really important. We've seen the intergenerational trauma, with the impacts of the Dawn Raid, and how, families were ripped apart. Some families, members of the family were sent back home to the islands, and it's that, that trauma is still very much alive and is living within our families and our communities. And I think a part of that is that, we've seen this happen in our communities before, and maybe we haven't talked about the impacts of it in terms of mental health and how it's led to suicide. And so as the generation that was born here, it's that sense of we don't want to be selfish. Our parents came here, they gave up so much for us. They sacrificed everything. They want us to get a good education. They want us to do all these things. And so it's well, when I'm thinking about, if I'm, feeling overwhelmed or, really stressed and I feel like I need to go to talk to someone, how do I be okay, I need to invest in myself. I've got this huge family, huge community, but no, I just want to take time out for myself to make sure that I'm okay. I think sometimes it can be a really huge barrier to be okay, that's not actually a selfish thing to do. If you're feeling well, then you're going to, then your family and your community is going to thrive. And so I think sometimes seeing someone being so selfless and resilient when you feel like you have to do the same thing, so you can't take time out for yourself when you need to, if you need to go to therapy, you need to talk to someone, or I don't know, you just need that additional support.
If you're not looking after yourself and giving, you're actually going to experience, or there's going to be some type of causes in that which may lead to some of these horrific statistics we're seeing, right?
Yeah. If you don't take the time out to focus on yourself sometimes or to get support, that can have roll-on effects to your family and your community. And I guess, our cultures, we are very much, we are givers. And I guess as we've transitioned into the Western world, a lot of this comes with a financial burden. We didn't have a lot of money, or our families didn't have a lot of money back in the island, so we gave in other ways. But here, now that we're in Aotearoa, New Zealand, that comes with a significant financial burden, because not only are we giving to our families here, we're giving to our families back home as well. And so, that can have implications psychologically, absolutely, the stress, the worry, the burden that comes with that. And also depending on where you may be placed in the family, the burden may be higher or more significant with an older sibling than it is for a younger sibling as well. We particularly see that in our Tongan families. The elder sibling usually takes on a lot of the load. So, yeah.
And I guess what we can say is that we can only handle so much, and the stats are showing us that, right? When you bottle things up, it doesn't mean the voice goes away.
Yeah.
You just start talking to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's one of the huge things about being able to talk to others, when we have that negative internal self-talk and we keep going over it and over it internally, and we're not expressing it or trying to explore what that looks like with others, that's when it can lead to, feelings of depression, where we can feel so far more anxious than we would usually. And it can also play into how we see ourselves, our identity, and that can be really conflicting as well, especially when we have, with our older generation has a way of, this is the way things should be done. But in a Western context, we believe that things should be done, a certain way. So that identity conflict between, our Pacific world and our Western world, that can be super conflicting for us. And that again will play out internally as well. And I guess one of the, when we're thinking about risk factors of, leading to suicide, it's, the internal self-talk can turn into, less than desirable mental health, bad mental health, if we just say it like that, exposure to, violence, substances, things like, like I just said, identity conflict, and, some of those intergenerational misunderstandings that, we have with our older generation as well. Yeah.
Sometimes I never know if it's actually okay to say suicide, because you talk to some people and they're like, don't talk about it. You're making more because you mention those words. Yeah. And that I know language plays an important part.
If someone was thinking about taking their own life, they've been thinking about it for a long time. You saying the word suicide or asking if they're okay, even asking them if that's what they're thinking about, is not going to push them over the edge. That's why we need to normalize those conversations, because that conversation that you have with that person might just be, the olive branch that they needed for you to be like, for them to just like, unpack and be like, I just really needed to talk to someone about it. I didn't know who to talk to about it. I didn't know how to. And that's why that Life Keepers training is so beneficial, because it talks about things like that. How do you talk to someone if you think something might be going on with them, even if you don't know if it could be suicide? And I think when we're talking about language, a lot of people say, so-and-so committed suicide, and it's that association with crime that makes it look like a bad thing to do. But no, we shouldn't be using words like they committed suicide. If someone died by suicide, or someone's thinking about suicide, just be really mindful about the language that we're using, so we can, invite those conversations, have positive conversations about it. Yeah.
What can we say today?
Yeah.
That's going to help influence positively.
It's just having conversations, just stepping out of your comfort zone. Sometimes it's going to be really scary. Our people are hurting, our people are dying. And so we deserve the opportunities to, be able to go to therapy, to be able to talk to people without feeling shamed or scared, or, and we deserve the opportunity to better our mental health. And I think the thing that we can really do at a community level is normalizing those conversations. That's something that everybody can do. I can walk out of this room and I could go talk to a friend and ask them how they're doing, or check in on them. That's something everybody can do today, tomorrow, next week. We can do those things. Those are really practical things we can do. Our system is failing us, and that's not going to change overnight. To become a clinical psychologist, it takes a minimum of 7 years. So we think about, there's probably about 2% of the clinical psychology workforce is Pasifika. So that's not going to change within not even the next few years. So the things that we can do now within our communities, we love to help people. Our communities love to help people. We love to talk. We've just got to be talking about things, that are really meaningful, like suicide, mental health, well-being. We just need to normalize those conversations. That's anything I could stress to anyone, is that we need to be having those conversations.
And if we don't, we can expect more kind of horrific outcomes, because if we don't change, we've got to somehow break that cycle of the bottling, the frustration, the trauma.
Just supporting each other, talking about it. And I guess obviously from like my work perspective, like I'm going to do whatever I can do in the research space to try and, drive how important it is to have these conversations, to create more evidence that can inform, like, these action-focused responses. Lapaha is a perfect example, and that has supported this podcast of the work they're doing in the community, and all of their work and all of the, I guess, the programs that they design are all evidence-based, and that comes from research, So we're trying to do the mahi but on the ground level, on the research level, so that we can affect this greater change. But again, it's not going to happen overnight, may not even happen next year. Things that we can do right now is talking, being open, stepping out of your comfort zone. We didn't see our parents having those conversations, facilitating those conversations, or even guiding them. So, we can be those bearers of change.
Are you seeing that change within your students?
I think so. A lot of the research, so I do a lot of quantitative, which is lots of numbers and statistics, but I also do a lot of qualitative work, which is, having conversations with our community as well. And I have seen a shift, intergenerationally where, my generation, the generation just above me, is more willing and open to talk. And definitely the younger generation, I feel like they're even more willing to talk, more open to talk. And it maybe with the rise of social media, you have lots of people online sharing things about health and well-being, mental health particularly, and how we can, I guess, enhance that, how we can better our mental health. So I think that's really cool. We have all these things out there that we can, tap into. I think, and again, one of the hard things can be is that when we go to people for advice or we look online for advice, not every advice is equal.
Right.
We shouldn't always be listening to everybody's opinion or what everybody has to say, because it might not help us particularly. So that can be hard as well to navigate. What do you do when you come across something or someone that says, hey, you should just harden up, or, you should just get over it. Because again, that kind of messaging is not okay either.
Yeah. In some ways, it's designed to get our attention. Just because something's got your attention doesn't make it meaningful.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen some of the stuff around the psychological ways that it fixates you.
Clickbait. You've got to be a real critical consumer. I have seen, we talked about trauma before, I've seen a lot of people post things about, trauma this, trauma that, and then all of a sudden everybody thinks they're traumatized or they've experienced trauma. And trauma is a really, is a very real thing and a very sensitive topic. But just because you've experienced something does not mean it's necessarily trauma. So I think we've got to be really careful or really critical of, what we're viewing or what we're reading on social media, and then self-diagnosing ourselves with PTSD or self-diagnosing ourselves with depression. But that's why we need experts in that field. Being able to go to therapy or seeing a clinical psychologist to help us navigate that as well.
Yeah.
But again, it comes down to access. Clinical psychologists are super expensive. That's not always accessible. If you can get to one, sometimes there's a huge wait list. There's a lot of barriers. But yeah, I think I just come back to, there are things we can do now, which is still having those conversations. But we just have to be critical about those conversations. How does it serve me? How does it fit with my worldview? just being really reflective of what you're consuming and what you're listening to.
That's awesome advice. And I hope people put the doctor in front of your name when they're listening for that legitimacy, right? Because if that's what the research says, you know, and all of the things we've talked about, then like you can go to your loved ones and say, look at this.
Yeah.
You know, you're studying it and, you know, you're just telling me harden up or this is how we did it back in the islands. You know, this is not what the people are telling me who have studied this. What do you do in terms of your own life to keep your mental health strong?
Yeah, I think academia just as an area of work, it can be high demand, high stress. So I talk. Like I talk to my husband. I spend time with family, like my kids, you know, they bring joy to my life, and I have to make sure that I prioritize that, you know, make sure I make space for that because that's super important. When I was doing my PhD, you know, I used to let the work get on top of me. And this was before I had my son. And then when I had my son, I was like, you know, my priorities have to change. You can do anything, but you can't do everything. And that was something that really stuck with me as I was going towards finishing my PhD, because I was like, you know, I've got to, you know, still have time for things that bring me joy, or else, you know, what good am I going to be to my kids? What good will I be to my husband, my family, my community? You know, I can't bring my best self to the table if I'm not looking after myself. I can't do this research with my communities and tell them all these great things they should be doing if I'm not even doing them myself, as cliche as that sounds. But yeah, I can't do my best work if I'm, you know, burnt out, stressed, overwhelmed, not enjoying the good things as well.
You can do anything, but not everything.
Yeah.
What happens if you try and do everything?
Yeah, you're going to be stressed, burnt out, overburdened. And I think, you know, our Pacific communities, you know, they love to give, they love to do all the things. And it's particularly something I found at work. You know, I'm one of 2 Pacific psychology researchers in my department. And so everyone comes to me, or, you know, a lot of people come to cultural advice. What should I do with this Pacific student? Or, you know, all the Pacific things. And I'm like, you know, we have Google, or, you know, there should be a sense of, you know, being able to reflect yourself. You know, we're all in this academic space together. I'm not your only source of knowledge. So it's the ability to say no as well. And I know that can be really hard for our Pacific community to say no, especially if it's someone who holds great prestige in your community. But I guess it's just having, you know, just being strong and saying like, you know, I can't do everything. And
also that there's consequences if we try and put people in that. Actually, that's, you know, maybe that is a trauma-inducing request sometimes. It has an unconscious impact that we don't even know is driving us.
Yeah. The government is like saying, like, how do we make mental health and well-being better for our Pacific peoples? We need to ask our communities, look at their lived experiences. The inquiry into mental health back in 2018, you know, Pacific peoples said, you know, we need Pacific ways of knowing and being to be integrated into the mental health system, into the healthcare system. We're like 4 years on, and I can't say that's really been done, if at all. And that's why so many people are so passionate about, you know, being able to provide free counselling or free therapy sessions to our young people, and trying to ensure that they're culturally responsive. You know, sometimes we want to talk to people that look like us, have the same shared or lived experiences, because when you walk into that room, there's like a sense of, I don't have to explain everything about myself. I don't have to tell you that my parents migrated here and X, Y, Z, you know, all these things have happened, because you already know, you've already been through that yourself. But if those people aren't sitting in those chairs, you know, able to help navigate, you know, through that with us, then, you know, there can be a disconnect right from the outset. But for some people that will be okay, but for others it won't be okay. But, you know, and I guess also building a culturally responsive workforce means that, you know, everybody will be able to work with everybody. But again, that's something that's not going to happen overnight either. How many times have you said, hey, how are you to someone? And they're like, I'm fine. Or you've said, I'm fine back. When really you've probably got a lot going on, and it would just be so helpful for yourself to just, you know, talk about it. And then it gives the other person the opportunity to talk about what's going on in their life as well.
Yeah. I've seen that magic. You know, I'm someone who's not religious, but man, it feels spiritual when you connect with someone.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it's all about, except we package it up in different things. And if you really talk to someone, and, you know, people hopefully have that memory have some of the best moments when you connect.
It's so much easier to overlook anything to do with mental health because we can't see it, right? We just feel it, we experience it. And, rather than being the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, at the crisis end, which services we very much need, let's work from the top of the cliff. And it's going to start with those conversations, normalizing those conversations with our family, with our communities, and helping to support them, guiding them to resources that we may know about. If we don't know, then we can find ways. Yep. There's the internet, Google. There's
awesome.
Podcasts like this. We're a collective community, so it's like banding together. That's what we thrive off our relationships. Yeah, taking comfort in knowing that you're not alone. Other people may be experiencing what you are or have experienced before. So again, I feel like I'm a broken record, but it's just talking. Every conversation is not going to be easy, or it may not be helpful, but we're still getting that conversation going. One of the key things that come through research is that, it's like having strong relationships. So, keeping those alive and well, always checking in on people, having those uncomfortable conversations if we need to.
Yeah.
If we can keep doing that at a community level, not being, normalizing those conversations around suicide, mental health, well-being, I think we'll be in a better position to not always be at the crisis end where it's like doctor's visits or hospital visits or just needing those crisis modes of support.
Sarah, where can people follow your story if they want to check out some of your research or, they want to be a researcher themselves? Like, where's the best place to?
I guess you can just Google my name. There we go, back to Google, Sarah Kapeli. And if you put UOA, I guess my profile will come up. You can always, if you're interested in study, you can always email me. And I'm always happy to have a chat to our students, particularly our Pacific and our Indigenous students who want to come through and pursue a journey in psychology or like any area that's related to that. Because, we do need more Pacific researchers as well. We need more people who are willing to hold the pen to tell our stories, because for so long our statistics, they're bleak and they look dire, but when we have more Pacific researchers who are willing to fill that space, they enrich all those numbers with our stories, with our voices. So I think that's really important. So if anyone's interested in the area, come have a chat with me.
Cool. Well, thanks again for sharing part of your story and part of your research. And I feel very hopeful based off what we've talked about. So thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. If you think you or someone you know may be at immediate risk, call 111 or connect to the following services to get help. Text the Need to Talk helpline on 1737. Call the Depression helpline on 0800 111 757 or text 4202. If you would like more information on suicide prevention training and education, visit LEVAR on www.leva.co.nz. More support numbers are available in the show's description.